And also reflecting on the urban, and there will be a discussion between our four panelists. We've met Yonghua and Michael, but let me introduce the team of Valérie, Portefaix, and Laurent Gutierrez, who would also be speaking to us tomorrow. They are architectural historians and designers. What else are they? There are lots of other things. The publishers, they publish work on Yonghua and on Ai Weiwei. They also have an ongoing project, I think it's still ongoing, on mapping Hong Kong. Yeah, it's a never-ending project. A never-ending project on mapping Hong Kong, and a number of volumes have come out now. Their books, they're also really good, very enterprising team, because they also do a lot of their own publishing and distributing, and the books can be found actually all over the world. I mean, I saw it in Irvine, for example, in the Irvine bookstore yourself. So these would be our four panelists, and we'll start in this order with Yonghua, Michael, and then Valérie and Laurent would be presenting together. So let's say each of you as group speak for about 10-15 minutes. Okay, so okay. Yonghua, what's up?
All right. Well, in my case, I said a thing or two about the city in the past few days already. So I just like to take this opportunity maybe to sum up some of my thinkings at this point about city. Actually, it's very much about the city and design. So basically, there are three cities I'm concerned with. The first one is the livable city. I have to say that the term in Mandarin right now is 宜居. It's pretty much the equivalent of livable in English. However, the definition of livability in China is very different than the one, say, in America, in Northern America, perhaps. So if you see the top 10 list of livable cities in the U.S., or again, probably in Northern America, there are a lot of small cities or medium-sized cities. Rarely there are the large cities for a number of reasons, because the criteria for a livable city in Northern America really has to do with the quality of the environment, even probably including natural scenery and so on. So cities like Vancouver, of course, is very livable and is on the large side, but it usually could be small. Portland, Oregon, and so on. I don't exactly remember the list, but you can get a picture. Places with probably not a lot of business and with a lot of trees would have a better opportunity to hit the list. And here in China, the livable city list is just so much like the largest metropolises anyway. Right now, I don't know which one is number one. Could be Shanghai. I think like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, all the usual suspects. And then the traffic could be terrible, pollution could be serious, and so on. Why these cities are livable? Because they have job opportunities. So that the standard for a livable city in China has very little to do with life. But I thought, can you start your own business easily in a city? Of course, you have to go to one of these major cities. So, and as I mentioned before, so that kind of a definition of a livable city it's more than questionable. I think they should be changed right away. When we talk about livability, it has to do with from convenience and comfort, and to really, if the city is where people can lead a more a healthier life and so on. So that's actually one of the things. I think it started to change, but yet it really is talking about changing one of the major perception of city in the past 30 years, since city has been perceived very much as engine for economic development. So livability is one thing. The second idea I also mentioned, I think 2 nights ago, is the pleasurable city. So people are living in the city. They have chosen to live in the city not because they are here to create a low carbon footprint or for eventually not for economic development, but they think they have the opportunities to meet people, to have the pleasure to shop as often as they can, and to have a very active nightlife and so on. They can stay up to do, although very unhealthy, but if they choose to do bar hopping until early morning, and then they would prefer Shanghai, not Beijing, probably not other cities. And I don't suggest you do it because you work all day, but if you wish. And so the pleasure of city is actually the gut reason eventually why people are here, not in suburbs and not in the rural area. Although here is talking about why people would live a certain way, but also talking about choices. So if you want to live in the suburb, the suburbs, as you know, we have a Chinese suburbia. Is there a trip arranged for Americans? No, huh? No. Well, you don't need to go. It looks like California with a lot of humidity. So anyway, and I'm actually not even being ironic. I'm actually talking about choice. There is Shenzhen is really a south for China, next to Hong Kong, and there is a suburban town which is totally modeled after Switzerland. Just imagine Switzerland without the snow-capped mountains. Otherwise, it's the same. Well, not exactly the same, but the point is, if people prefer to live that way, it's not my preference, but that's okay. And then those people probably don't want to really live in a city, where they need to walk, and then people would enjoy walking. So not only that, in our design, we actually today we have to tell our clients and also the government authorities, there is a difference between a large city and a small town. So if you go out to a small town, they all try to look like big cities. It depends. Actually, some little towns don't even think Shanghai is the right model. And for instance, Nansha is a little town in Guangdong, and that was modeled after, was it Paris or somewhere else? Maybe
everything. California
and Paris mixed. And then they have this kind of idea for being something very large, and then they don't have the quality of being small. And then, so what's the difference between small town, big cities, suburbs, and even very rural areas? And that's something we need to really work out, so that when people can have the choices, and then hopefully they can make the right one. So the third one is sustainable city. Sustainable city, I kind of mentioned in a very dry way 2 nights ago, as to a place where we know somehow to get the carbon emission down a bit. But maybe I can just add one thing today. But also for us, if you combine the other 2 ideas, the livable city and the pleasurable city and the sustainable city, I think it offers lots of ideas. For instance, having your, I know I have one, but I think actually, even in Shanghai, really you can have your own vegetable garden, in the city, and then you can, meaning that actually city can be agricultural, and then you can use for instance, the rainwater and treat it. I forgot the word in English. Halfway, so that it's not completely treated. You don't need to do so, and use that resources and to have gardens on rooftop and so on. So there are a lot of things you can do. It's not only just to it's not having a diet. That's the whole point. But rather you start to imagine very different lifestyles. And that's sustainable. That adds to the pleasure of the city. And of course, the city will become more livable. I think that just to wrap up, I think what I'm saying for China is really very much an urgent matter. The communist government has already realized that 2 years ago, during the 17th National Conference of the Communist Party, and there's one of the major goals the party set up for China is the building of eco-friendly cities. They actually, because if you read it, you could tell right away. They consulted, experts from various fields. They pull these bullet point list. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. Just in terms of achieving the target and so on. And then now I think the economic crisis, although probably not as bad in China, but it actually also becomes a very good warning signal. So if you don't really think about sustainability and the other matters, and then your economic development would not be able to continue anyhow. So that's China. And then I do believe there's a lot of these ideas probably can be applied to other parts of the world, the combination of these 3 different cities. So anyway, so that's what I'd like to offer here. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. So we go to Michael.
Thanks, Akbar. I want to just respond fairly briefly to some of the contributions yesterday and this morning, and just illustrate them briefly. But I suppose to start, I want to just pick up a theme that I think was raised this morning about how we think through the lens of the critical, how we think through what that means in terms of a project, a program, a seminar, a fortnight that's taking place in China, in Shanghai, that's taking place in a particular context and set of debates around urbanism that also has a specific resonance in design, but a resonance, it seems to me, which there has been a degree of ambivalence and uncertainty around that maybe we might kind of flesh out a little bit in the discussion. It seemed to be appearing this morning. And I suppose in the tenor of what I have to say is that I've been very much inspired by contributions from the floor, the contributions from other speakers. So in a sense, I had a few images that were going through my head as people were speaking, but it begins from a context where I guess I find it interesting that, I mean, it was mentioned this morning that the post-colonial doesn't register in China in the same way as in many other places, and that discourse is problematic. It strikes me as interesting that I think the post-colonial is present in some of Leo's work. It's also a sense that people haven't really talked about how young Shanghai is as a city, and the fact that how we think about some of those colonial legacies or erasures in this city in particular. But also when we're thinking of the critical, I just wanted to read you a very short quote from a piece of work, a book called Capitalism with Chinese Characteristics. It's a very strong piece of scholarship. It's by a colleague at MIT, where there's something that by Yasheng Huang, Wang Yasheng, who says in this book, capitalism with Chinese characteristics is a function of political balance between two Chinas, the entrepreneurial market-driven rural China vis-à-vis the state-led urban China. And goes on to say, when and where rural China has the upper hand, Chinese capitalism is entrepreneurial, politically independent, and vibrantly competitive in its conduct and virtuous in its effects. That's an important word, I think. But when and where urban China has the upper hand, Chinese capitalism tends towards political dependency on the state and is corrupt. A certain kind of valorization, a certain kind of critique from a piece of scholarship that is, I think, probably in this room wouldn't be uncontentious in its suggestions. And I think we need to think through a context where critique has many different dimensionalities to it. It's a lot in the same way as we touched on with the post-colonial. There's a sense, I think, that we might want to draw on this notion of the surface that Sarah, I think, was very inspiringly picking up on, to think about what kinds of ways are fabrication, emergence, becoming possible through a surface. What kinds of forms of inscription emerge in this kind of context. I just wanted to, as people were talking about the importance of the wall, of the importance of boundaries, and the ways in which these boundaries begin to subvert themselves, just a few images were going through my mind, one of which was unfortunately designed, but won awards on one of the peace lines in Belfast. I was lucky or unfortunate enough to be on a national inquiry in the wake of the bombings of 7/7 in London, which looked at various forms of community relations between faiths and minorities and majorities and so on. And we spent some time in Belfast and were shown an exemplary case where one of the peace lines is an oxymoronic notion itself in Belfast, because it's basically the boundaries of an almost apartheid separation that still sit there like an ossified urbanism, which separates Protestant from Catholic, had been punched through. And this particular piece of urban design, which was held up for a celebration, involved a youth club which was made part of the wall. But almost like a dam, the way it worked was that from 5 to 7, one gate opened on one side of the wall, and the Catholics came into the youth club and used the youth club from 5 to 7. And at 7 o'clock, that gate opened again, and the Catholics went out, and the gate shut, and the other gate opened, and the Protestants came into the same youth club from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. This particular kind of punching through the wall, I guess, was something that we might want to think about or problematize slightly, not least in the context of 3 examples I'm just going to show you in 2 minutes as a flash, because there were subliminal flashes. Sarah was talking this morning, for me at any rate. One is that in London at the moment, there is something that's been constructed in this kind of great space that is meant to be the future of London in the East. Around the Olympics bid, and given that China's experience last year, you might be interested to know that in the case of London, this is known without irony, I must say, actually was by the people who have built this, as the O fence. It is a boundary in blue around which has this leitmotif that you'll find absolutely everywhere. There's this kind of sickly blue, and you find putting a boundary around the edge of this fence alongside these various slogans, idioms. Everybody's London 2012, as you can just about peek through. You are part of it. a kind of reappropriation of some of these spaces to be inscribed. So people have got hold of this paint and begun to produce particular effects, not least around the fence itself. And I thought at least at 2:30 in the afternoon we ought to manage at least a couple of smiles, I would hope, but also knowing that we think this is actually from Stalker, an architectural practice people might know that have worked around some of these things, but a few years ago. But also these images as well might be familiar to people that Banksy has actually put on the wall, and another wall in Palestine. The point I'm trying to make is very straightforwardly. These walls are, as Sarah was saying, I think, surfaces of inscription as much as they are forms of boundary. They create their own logics. But likewise, you see in Shanghai, the walls too, where if you go down to the Old Town or many other places where you'll find sites whereby traders, if you want to buy certain things, if you need a passport, if you need hukou papers, you can go down to the Old Town and literally read the signs of the city, read the walls as people inscribe their mobile phones to the numbers on the walls with various things, various degrees of legality that kind of put you in touch with these invisible creativities that the wall becomes the surface to inscribe upon. So I wanted to, in a sense, I suppose I wanted to just pull us a little bit towards, I was kind of thinking as all of the speakers were talking this morning, of T.S. Eliot's the Burnt Norton, which I know I'll get wrong, but the piece in Burnt Norton, which become almost a cliche, that time past and time future are always simultaneously there, and time present. And there's the other thing about, if all time is incommensurable, all time is always simultaneously present. And if we think, there's been some discussion, I think rightly so, about the problem about a verticality through which a historical narrative can be privileged. But in a workshop on design, I guess what I was trying to think about would maybe push the discussion in reflection on the last couple of days towards is a sense of the presence of futures, a sense of futures present. The anthropologist David Scott talks about the ways in which other people's futures past are. Yeah, that's right. Other people's past futures are our past present. You get the idiom the right way around. If you're not running too fast. The point I'm trying to make is that inscribed on these surfaces, these forms of becoming, these forms of new assemblage, are notions of the future, are captivations of the future. And if I want to kind of push the discussion a little bit out that way, that we might want to think about how design and futures present are simultaneously embodied in things, and what kinds of futures are there. And in that context, two other comments I want to make, and then shut up, I guess. Another comment that was made this morning was that David Goldberg invoked Gilroy's notion of the convivial at one time as a way of reacting to these forms of contemporary urbanism. And I suppose, especially since Achille's out of the room, I can say something about him in his absence, I guess. But that there is a sense in which Achille also uses the convivial, but it's always actually interested me, and I asked them both about it at different times, about, I think, Gilroy's convivial is taken from Ivan Ilyich, who's the kind of the anarchist philosophical take on a sort of anti-institutional, as I understand it. And Achille can correct me in his absence of ideas, is his notion comes more from kind of Castoriadis and a Foucauldian response to state power. And I suppose what both of those things, those different notions of the convivial, it seems to me, share some things but differ in other ways. And that's part of the difference is around how we think about subjectification, the making of subjects, the ways in which the convivial subject emerges. And in particular, I guess, an ambivalence about state power and how we respond to its aesthetics, its performance, the things it facilitates as well as the things that it blocks. And it's that notion of ambivalence, I think, about futures present that might make us think through an urbanism of futures presence through not so much, if you like, a language of power and resistance and its kind of binary forms, but through a kind of language of ambivalence and uncertainty and the specificities of of objects in a way which we were thinking about a little bit this morning. Which is why I want to just finish, I suppose, if I can push the first point about futures present, the second point about ambivalence and state power, to a third point, which I'm afraid comes from walking down the stairs this morning to breakfast, which is about Burio, actually, and the notion of the relational aesthetic in all of this. But rather than kind of dwell on Burio, there's a notion that he has that suggests that we might be, which for all of those problematics in that work, that a notion that we are tenants of culture, which I like as a phrase, that we are tenants of culture, because it assumes something that is provisional, it assumes something about making, it seems to me to address some of the issues that people were concerned with in the film yesterday, in some of the things that people were talking about in the discussion of the film, some of Akbar's contributions and so on. But also, we might think about the sorts of design process that are part of that everyday tenanting of culture and design. So in particular, I suppose, I was trying to think of easy examples, but I mean, the kinds of things I'm thinking about are the videos they have, particularly in Beijing, on a lot of the lifts and taxis and a lot of the offices and so on. There's somebody who did a piece of research a few years ago on how the networks of the city, those things that look very high-tech, were actually all being replaced every evening by kind of large numbers of people running around the city, kind of literally taking out a new video and putting and people around the room will probably know the objects I mean. But also the issues that you find in the street vendors. Wang Jiaming, who's a colleague working on the project I mentioned yesterday, talks about trying to make an agenda of the everyday life of some of the street vendors and some of the things around, even down to the phone numbers that you can buy, and the fact that, certainly for me, that some of the interesting issues about what makes a phone number valuable. So, to state the blindingly obvious in a Chinese context, that the more eights in the number kind of doubles or triples the number of the value of the chip in your mobile phone in contemporary China. So how we think about those forms of interface between assemblage objects and futures present is what I want to end with. And I suppose to come back and really again be slightly mischievous about this, that in the context of Chung Yung-ho's fantastic talk the other night, I actually looked, because something he said, I showed him the quote in an interview. He actually said something which is the past, in the context of design in China, the past and the future can both be part of the present, which is, I suppose, ties me back to the Eliot point earlier on. But I'd almost like to kind of open up and to kind of maybe ask Chung Yung-ho and the audience to kind of think through that a little bit, but also maybe a bit more mischievously, I think both Leo and Akbar, in your absence, described you as part of a new critical tradition. So I was wondering whether you might want to answer what they meant, or given that you weren't there when they said it, they might want to say what they meant when they were saying it in your absence, in the context of what for me has certainly been a fascinating couple of days discussion of contemporary urbanism and design. Thank you.
Okay, we are kind of used to present together, so we will do our stereo presentation as we are used to. So we're going to be back to Hong Kong and to respond last lecture of Yun-He and this morning's lecture of Professor Laurent. We titled it Possibly Fast, Possibly Slow. We thought was very important, and also was in this morning response, there was this kind of shift from architecture to design, and also from space to time. And living in Hong Kong, of course, you would think about the density and this very strong topography. But for us, Hong Kong is mainly a space of speed, and this kind of compression of time is maybe the major activator to understand and to make good use of the city. So also, this is to link with tomorrow. Tomorrow will mainly focus on southern China, also linked with Hong Kong, but within the Pearl River Delta territory. But these two buttons are very typical if you go in factories. That's what you find on the machine. So that each worker is entitled to press rabbit or turtle. And those are not negating one or the other. It's really playing a rhythm in alternance. And I think as users, we could also think that we can activate the city with those two buttons and accelerate and slow down at different times, different moments of the day. With Hong Kong speed also, I would have a little thought about Akbar's piece on Wong Kar-wai, image, movement, accelerating time. This morning, Professor Lioli, very interesting, reading Benjamin in 2 hours. What is more interesting, is it to read Benjamin or to read it in 2 hours? With Hong Kong, there's always this notion of compression of time, which is crucial. So we as users are performing the city. We are the main activists of a city. I would say we as users, not we as architect or we as designer. Everybody is entitled to press those buttons and to play with the city. As Akbar was saying, the city is likable, is livable, but likable and pleasurable, and we need to be in control of this. Of those buttons. Also, this I would refer in that sense of also a city. I would not say surface, but the city you cannot see from Google Earth, which is maybe the city of all those icons, which you see on Google Earth. But that's really the city which is underneath this visible three-dimensional layer. This also reminds Archigram and maybe this whole period of the 60s with the Homo Ludens. I quote them when they were saying that what is more interesting, what is more important in Oxford Street when it's raining, is it the architecture of the street or the rain? This also had recently resonance with Isozaki in Tokyo, when in 2000 he set up what he called for the City of Girls, for the Japanese pavilion, presenting for the first time Tokyo, not activated by an amazing infrastructure or architecture, but really a city of performance. Those Japanese girls with their long nails, mobile phone, this kind of gaze activating the streets and creating very strong sense of identity for the city of Tokyo. So the girls, the rain, we need to define what is activating Shanghai, which is slightly different. But going back to Hong Kong and designing this experience, also, maybe I will go to the book quickly later. We are starting to observe through numbers of research, but different type of people, different groups of people which are activating the city. And recently we have been working, for example, with parkour, which is very interesting in the terms, parkour, free running. I would say that we are moving somehow from flaneur, from a very comfortable environment, to tracer. When again, young kids, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids would activate the city, looking for new ways of tracing this city, playing with the city, and not using normal routes, and not using also not the speeds which the city is allowing you to use. So we are starting to map this new scenography around Central, tracing new routes, tracing new speed, tracing new alternatives also, which are somehow cutting this dichotomy between public and private space, which doesn't make sense anymore, but a space which is appropriated. Laurent will come back to that. And most important, as users, not using any more devices, as we are less and less allowed to fly kites, play ball, etc. in what's also called public spaces, but just use our body as a main tool to find new routes and to build up new communities. These also will have echo with flash mobs, those kind of instant events created by a group of mobile phone, which again will change the landscape. More and more activities running on with Twitters and all those small electronic devices, allowing us to be together in different ways and activate the city in different way. So very quickly, I will go through Mapping HK, which was our first book introduced by Akbar. That's when we met 10 years ago. where after 5 years of being in Hong Kong and trying to put all our research together, we finally found 6 vectors. Vectors as origin, direction, and intensity. Intensity that we want to put in opposition with density, which again relates to speed and time. So 6 vectors somehow finding new ways of understanding the city. I will go very quickly through them. The first one, fluid machine, is first mainly related to the liquid condition of Hong Kong as a port, efficiency, 1 container moving per minute. Here, this is to illustrate this kind of magic phenomenon of shifting from airports from the center of the harbor to Chep Lak Kok. Yet, the authorities providing a new airport in the center of the city so that somehow you can check in and go to the office within 5 minutes. And this new airport in the city taking you to your plane in 23 minutes. 23 minutes being also a kind of magic distance. If you open any brochures of developers, you would see that any development is 23 minutes from the center. Runningscape, moving from this kind of liquid condition to a city which is non-stop, ever growing, extending onto the sea. So the sea is becoming this desert as a kind of new potential to go beyond. Cheap planning, which is moving from 2D to 3D. This is referring to the way we operate with our computers, whether we change one cell, add a little extension, a screen, or change the whole system. Somehow we understand that the city is this kind of very chaotic, yet making sense, efficient montage of different elements. Dynamic labyrinth in which, again, as users, we start to enter and perform at different speeds, either through the floating system of pedestrian walkways, lifts. This is the famous escalator in Central, twisting through the fabric, and where, again, daily routine is performed every day. And finally, I will stop here with appropriated place, in which, with this very banal photo of Mongkok, you can see different empty lots, which are all given specific roles. There is in the center a small public garden, playground, which reminds you that public space are made. They are not born. I mean, they are really made by government agencies. They are not coming by chance. It's a decision. Or economic speculation, again, plus acceleration, empty lots of empty building being used as car park in order to generate some income, waiting for reconstruction of something else.
I will continue, but before I carry on this and develop and illustrate some of the points that Valérie has just mentioned, I will just come back on this idea of the city and try to define it again. My understanding of it is basically the kind of scale of entities that we need to define more clearly. The first one being the city, as we talk about since the beginning, and I will define it just as a structure that will create an opposition between nature and culture in order to basically create a sort of protection of assets, and this protection being usually, I mean, traditionally, historically, walled or with a border. Then that's remained the same today. I mean, the city of Shenzhen, also it's really new, has its own border, and this notion of citizenship still exists. Either you are within, you are a full citizen of Shenzhen, or you do not have the hukou to stay there. Then that's the city, the structure. Then the second word that we use is urban, and I will call that a system instead of a structure. And basically, this system is a kind of unknown dimension, a shift to an unknown dimension that it's more operating as with its own process of mixing, of networking, and so far I will say this is probably the most important phenomenon of the last 2 centuries. This process of urbanization, with already in the developed country, 70% or more people being urbanized, and accelerating dramatically in developing countries, such as 1% per year in China. Then I will say, and I'm not the only one, this is probably again the most important phenomenon in the last 2 centuries of humankind. Then the third element which I would like to define is the territory, and that can come back to some of Sarah's point this morning, and also Achille, which we can define it not anymore as a structure or a system, but maybe as a dimension, as a surface, a geographical, political, or economical surface dimension. And this is probably what we are more talking about in our specific research. Some of Valerie's point, and also illustrate some of them. The first thing is moving from the physical density to an intensity, and even more to a temporal density. The temporal density being basically the amount of use of any given space. Usually architects, designers will refer to the density as a kind of amount of physical elements within a given space, either building or people, per square meter or kilometer square or whatsoever. The temporal density being the amount of activities that exist in one particular space. And I think today, when we are referring to this notion of density, and especially in the Asian context, having in mind this notion of time, this notion of speed, I think we are more referring to the temporal density. That's one point. The other point is, which I will develop now, is no, sorry, I missed one thing. Yeah, talking about the city, as I described it before, the structure, the city as a structure, there are 2 things that is basically happening in any city, and I will name them as kind of provocative way. As I say, the city is a structure to protect the assets, to be out of the of kind of nature, the chaos of nature, and being in the kind of more civilized environment. Then there are 2 things that, in order to protect and control, is what I will provocatively call the police, which we know, the control, and the polish, means the cleaning of the space, basically, the police and the polish. Right. Okay. I continue on the appropriated place. As Valérie said, that there is not any longer this distinction between the public and the private. That's peculiar to Hong Kong. It's not the case in every cities or every urban environment. But it's definitely true in Hong Kong, where both kind of public or private adopt the rule of what do you call it? The do not, basically. The do not is in any public space or any private corporate space, you find this list of do not do this, do not do that, do not do that, do not eat, do not sit, do not leash your dog, whatsoever. Then that's the reality of the space, of the public or private space. Then we start to play on that, and we say that maybe there is a third domain that could be explored, and we call it the appropriated in both ways. Then, for example, here is appropriated by the private. This is a private space, is a fake Italian plaza. It's appropriated by the private, and you not allow to sit, to eat, you just allow to pass by, or even to just enter the premise of the corporate. Then In response to that, I mean, of course, you have all the dimension, the public being appropriated by the private, and there is a famous example in Hong Kong where every Sunday you have the domestic helpers meeting under the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, the Foster's building, and having a kind of community party, or kind of rituals of the less wealthy a community appropriating the CBD of Hong Kong capitalism. Then another possibility is appropriation by one individuals, like we can see a lot in Asia and especially in Hong Kong. Here it's a kind of movable booth that is an appropriation of 1 square meter of 1 or more square meter of land for a private purpose. Then another form which we find kind of hilarious is this homeless guy just in front of our house under the highway, appropriating a corner or a column of the highway and basically building up his own house. And what is interesting here, and that will be kind of again the legal and the informal aspect of the city, kind of challenging what is legal, what is informal. Here the guy is reinventing basically on the monthly basis, being kicked off by the police. He's reinventing his office and changing the position of his bed, of his desk, and so on. Then one other illustration of the cheap planning, this time the concept that Valérie explained, the ability of the city to reinvent itself non-stop. And Yun-Ho or Professor Lioli was mentioning yesterday the West Kowloon competition as being one of the major venture for Hong Kong to come. It was our answer of using the theory we developed of the city moving in every direction, spatially, but also in terms of time. Then that's the answer, the cheap planning, where basically we have containers or kind of element like container that will be put together to create a new landscape. And here, instead of having something vertical, we deliberately play on the horizontal way and reclaiming the sea. Then with this playful situation of what is water, what is liquid, what is solid, and so on. And that also explain or echo to something that Jung-Ho was mentioning about bigness. We move basically from the 1 square meter of the little sofa, the making private, to the planning of a fragment of the city. Then the last project I would like to illustrate, and to kind of homage to Akbar, is the soft disappearance. And this is a few years after remapping HK, an illustration of building up islands of book in the shape of Hong Kong, with this book mapping HK, and a sea of trash. And after a few hours, again, a matter of time, this being totally vanished and recomposed by citizens. Thank you.